Once upon a time, there did exist a world without video games. Like so many things distinctly human, electronic games were born out of a combination of innovation, necessity, and curiosity. Early tinkerers made electronic amusements, cheap, crude entertainment that would transform in time to something potent and alive. This would not just happen by electronic wizardry, but by the endeavors of artists, designers, and entrepreneurs whose initial goal to entertain also came to challenge, captivate, and enlighten millions of people around the world. The men and women who created this industry allowed their own experiences and the world around them to inform their creations. This is the story of video games. This is Video Games, the movie.
Shooting star leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm racing by, passing by like Lady Godiva. No, there's no stopping me. I'm burning through the sky, 200 degrees, just while they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic man out of you. Such a good time, I'm having a ball. Stop me now. If you wanna have a good time, just give me a call. Stop me now. Have a good time. Stop. Yes, I have a good time. I don't wanna stop at all. I'm a rocket ship on my way to Mars on a collision course. I'm a satellite. I'm out of control. I'm a sex machine ready to reload. Like an atom bomb, about to explode. I'm running through the sky, 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic woman of you. Don't stop me, don't stop me, don't stop me. Hey, hey, hey! Don't stop me, don't stop me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Don't stop me, don't stop me. Have a good time, good time. Don't stop me, don't stop me. Oh! Supersonic man out of you.
I love video games because I have the same experience that I have when I watch a movie that I love or read a book that captures my imagination, but I'm an active participant instead of a passive observer.
Video games have a really interesting role to play in the future of our species, and we're just starting to figure it out right now.
I feel like video games at this point are intrinsically linked into our culture in a way that's irrevocable. I think from here on it goes deeper. I think video games root deeper and deeper into everything we're doing. until they're just part of our lives in a way we don't even notice.
All media is relevant to its time. For example, records and cassette tapes disappeared from existence, but music didn't disappear, it was digitized. The same is true for movies and books. They evolved from one form to another. For video games, the evolution is the same. They will change and evolve, but they will forever be a part of our global culture. 100, 200 years from now, video games will still exist.
According to the Entertainment Software Association, the average gamer has been playing video games for 12 years. Adult gamers have been playing for an average of 14 years. Males average 16 years of gameplay, while females average 12. As of 2013, 49% of all U.S. households own a dedicated game console, and those that do own an average of 2. The average game player's age as of 2013 is 30. And no, it's not all males. 47% of gamers are females. 42% of game players believe that computer and video games give them the most value for their money compared with DVDs, music, or going out to the movies. Who buys video games? The average age of the most frequent game purchaser is 35. The point? Video games have grown up, and now they're not just in arcades or our living rooms. They're in our pockets. 15% of the most frequent game players pay to play online games, while 33% play games on their smartphones and 25% play games on a handheld device. Most gamers who own dedicated game consoles use them for other entertainment media as well, like watching movies, TV shows, and music. Are gamers social? 62% of all gamers play games with others, either in person or online. What about rating game content? Over 85% of parents are aware of the ESRB rating system, which rated games content and match it with the appropriate gaming age. E for everyone, T for teen, M for mature. But the question on a lot of minds is, do parents really control what their kids play? Over 73% of parents believe that the parental controls available in all new video game consoles are useful. Further, parents impose time usage limits on video games more than any other form of entertainment. Over 90% of the time, parents are present when games are purchased or rented, and 82% of the time, children receive their parents' permission before purchasing or renting a game. Much like movies, games have specific genres and subgenres, such as action, adventure, role-playing, casual games, shooters, strategy games, open world versus linear games, sports games, racing games. The list goes on, and each genre offers its own special mix of interactive entertainment. And yes, each is wildly successful in its own way. In the past decade, video games have gone from a $6 billion to an over $24 billion annual industry, far surpassing movies and music. The bottom line, video games are here, and they are here to stay. But where did all this begin? The answer is, well, a bit complicated.
That's the debate of the century, who's the father of video games. And, you can always say Nolan Bushnell because he founded Atari.
The godfather of video games has to be Nolan Bushnell.
It's got to be Nolan Bushnell.
I would say Bushnell.
Nolan Bushnell. I would probably give that to Bushnell.
Nolan Bushnell.
I would probably be in the Nolan Bushnell camp.
The man who came up with the whole Atari series.
Well, I'd have to say the creator of Atari. Whoever created Pong.
Ralph Baer, back in the late 60s, early 70s, making the brown box.
Ralph Baer, because he created the first console.
I think we both agree it was Ralph Baer.
Oh, Ralph Baer.
I can take two different angles here. I can say, whoever started the entire ball rolling is whoever created Pong. Whoever started games as we know them today, I'm going to have to say Shigeru Miyamoto from Nintendo.
Miyamoto.
Like Shigeru Miyamoto.
I think you know who Shigeru Miyamoto is.
But I'd go all the way back to MIT, the guys who did Space War, John Carmack.
Hideo Kojima, I'm telling you right now, brilliant. It can't just pick one because it's doing injustice to all the other people that helped develop the games.
I don't think I've ever really thought about who started gaming. I'm just appreciate that they did.
Some say it began here, a small back room at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1962 on the PDP-1, the first computer to utilize a visual display.
Steve Russell, which I consider to be the fellow who I stood on the shoulders of, did a game called Space War for the PDP-1. And I played that in college while working in an amusement park, and I felt if I could bring Space War to the arcade, it'd make a lot of money.
It was a game developed as a demonstration of the capabilities of a Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-1 computer back in 1962. A group of students and employees at MIT wanted to create a game that really would showcase the capabilities of this new machine that had one particular feature they were really interested in, and that was a display screen. Before that, most computers had maybe paper tape outputs or something like that, but this one had an actual screen on it.
I would go back to Steve Russell because he's the one that actually made the first playable game. Russell's product was so much fun to play, it infected every PDP-1 in the world, and they were trying to get the people to take it off the machine because it was wasting so much computer time.
Others argue that electronic games began much earlier, or that video games were a byproduct of Cold War technology. As usual, the truth is somewhere in the middle. While many industries and innovators combined to pave the way even for the possibility of the first video game, there is little argument as to the visionaries and the company that finally brought video games to the public in a big way.
Nolan brought to Atari the understanding of what makes a good game. He played a lot of games and understood them.
When we started this thing, we found that the games that were most successful were those that were simple to learn but impossible to master. Pong was somewhat of an accident. It was what we considered to be too simple, but when it got all wired up, and it was done by Al Alcorn, he put in some twists to it that were just remarkable and made it a massively fun game.
One of the design flaws in the original Pong game was the paddle would not go to the top of the screen all the way. And I was going to fix it, but I didn't get around to doing it, and I realized that that feature kept the game from two good people from playing it forever. It would never end.
The coining of the phrase video game refers to an RGB, or red, green, and blue raster, or video display device. Let's take Pac-Man, for example, the original. This is a bitmap image of Pac-Man. When enlarged, individual pixels appear as squares. Zooming in further, they can be analyzed with their colors constructed by adding the values for red, green, and blue. A bitmap corresponds, quote-unquote, bit for bit with an image displayed on a screen. A bitmap is technically characterized by the width and height of the image in pixels and by the number of bits per pixel, or a color depth, which determines the number of colors the pixel and ultimately the image can represent. The more bits, the better the games looked. More bits, however, meant more memory was needed, which was in short supply in the early days of gaming. This resulted in games that looked blocky and simple. But that didn't stop designers and gamers from diving headlong into this amazing new medium. Over time, and as technology advanced, 8 bits became 16, then 32, 64, 128, and so on. With each generational jump in graphics and so-called image fidelity, the depth of story and immersion in games seemed to progress as well. The technological limitations drove the art form and vice versa. Games were slowly evolving, and those on the inside were growing up with the very art form they were creating.
It was the Magnavox machine, I think it was called the Odyssey. And to show you how different things were there, I mean, basically allowed you to play Pong, really.
That console had no real graphics. There were just squares of light on the TV screen. So there were Mylar overlays that you would stick on the screen.
And so, like, then you put up like a haunted house, and then all of a sudden the white Pong ball would be like a ghost, you know, moving through the house.
So you had to kind of use your imagination and those Mylar overlays to understand the story they were trying to tell.
Magnavox presents Odyssey, the electronic game of the future. Odyssey easily attaches to any brand TV, black and white or color, to create a closed-circuit electronic playground. Odyssey gives you all the exciting action of hockey and 11 other challenging play and learning games for the entire family.
I had a very dear friend who was the head of Atco Records. She had an Atari 2600 console in her office, and she pointed at it and asked me, "Do you know what that is?" And I said, "Well, kind of, but what is it?" And she said to me, "It's a license to print money."
Attention shoppers, the new Atari cartridge game is in.
Only Atari makes the world's most popular home video games. The only Space Invaders. The only Asteroids. The only Pac-Man. And the only way you can play any of them is on a home video system made by Atari.
The first game that I ever remember playing was Space Invaders on the Atari 2600. I was 6 years old, and it was at my friend's house, and I was just blown away by the fact that you could manipulate an image on your television.
My first console I remember playing was the Atari 2600. We played everything. We had Donkey Kong, obviously. Baseball. I loved Burger Time. I remember my brother saying, like, wow, look at the graphics.
Pitfall was like a wonderland because, you know, like there were so many colors, you know, you could only really run, you know, it was a side-scrolling game, but it was amazing. You just see the same screen over and over again. You're like, oh, they added an alligator head that time. Or, oh, there's a vine. The fact that you could go underground in Pitfall, like, totally blew. Like, oh, you can go there?
You know, I knew enough about computers to know that it was a computer game, and but it was simulating, you know, this alien invasion with one ship on the ground, like, defending Earth from this alien invasion. And to me, it, you know, was almost, you know, like being there. Even with those rudimentary graphics, it was just the first time I'd ever had control over something on a television or something on a screen.
Probably the most memorable console of my entire life, and one that I missed, that I wish I still had, was my original Nintendo Entertainment System.
The Nintendo Entertainment System. Your parents help you hook it up. What's it like to play the Nintendo Entertainment System?
When you play the system with the most arcade hits, you're playing with power. The Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
I think that one of the reasons we get nostalgic about things is it's not necessarily the thing that we were doing. It's not that song. It's not that game or that movie or that book. It's what was happening in your life at that time. It hit at exactly the right time in my life. And the NES then was an amazing, amazing game system.
Games got better fast, it seems like. Before I made it to my teens, everything was kind of, it didn't look as great as the games did in the arcade. But by the time Nintendo came out, things started getting a lot better.
I was fortunate to first be exposed to Nintendo as a consumer. And for me, that very first system that I was exposed on was the Super NES. And I have many fond memories and many great stories around my interaction with that system, playing for many, many hours, playing games like The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, games like Chrono Trigger, all of these fantastic experiences that for me were my very first gaming experiences.
And I eventually got a Super Nintendo, and then I was all about Star Fox. And I was so into Star Fox and the story and what was going to happen next.
Most of the games, when we got into the Super NES, all of a sudden you had a reason to go do this because you were trying to save somebody. And so just that little bit there brought story elements into the game.
And what I think was really great about Nintendo during that era is they really wanted to make sure that all the games on the system were really high quality.
But Sega Genesis was an entirely different thing. Sega Genesis was to my experience in college as the Nintendo was to my experience in high school. You know, that was a very state-of-the-art console back then.
I think the next time I bought a console was the PS1. And I was like, all right, these games are getting ridiculous, so I got a PlayStation 1.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived. Pack up your stuff. I got a little surprise for you here. Check it out. What do you think about that? Sony's PlayStation has more than 150 games. NHL Face-Off 97, Jet Moto, Tobal #1, Destruction Derby 2, Crash Bandicoot. I could go on. I'm going to give you a personal demonstration. You can't stop, Grandma. You can't. Ooh, you go, girl.
PlayStation.
I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're hurting my elbow.
All of a sudden, you had this incredible amount of data on one disc that could also play music and everything else. To me, it was a portal to modern gaming today.
When Tomb Raider came on the scene in 1996, it brought people into a world that they hadn't really participated in before, the 3D world. And it was an immersive world in a time when there wasn't many games like that. And I think over the years that has grown. People latched onto that. When I talk to developers and I talk to fans around the world, they always hark back to their first experiences playing Tomb Raider, and it touched them and it was something special.
And I begged my mom for a console. I begged her. And it wasn't until the N64 came out that she finally gave in.
When we got into the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64, you started to see 3D for the first time. What that allowed the vision of Mr. Miyamoto to do was to say, now that I have the ability to manipulate polygons in real time at a fast enough frame rate, then instead of just going back and forth, now I can run around in circles or move into or out of the screen. So it brought a whole new dimension to the gameplay, and the controller was actually designed with an analog joystick to be able to control that movement. It started to add a whole new dimension into what gamers were used to, and so for a long time it had been this 2D, sort of parallaxing 2D planes. But as you sort of moved into that 3D era, you started to see people start to play with, what are the kinds of mechanics we can do now? What are the things that we can actually play with? What's this new world of this other dimension? And so, it was painful at first. Certainly there were good examples of it, but it was hard. It's hard to give the players this whole nother level of freedom that they weren't used to.
And then we started getting consoles that were bigger and better, and you could bring in more of a 3D environment, better frame rate and better sound, and then you could put more polygons on the screen so the guys could look, more realistic.
finally, with the PlayStation and the PlayStation 2, you started to see some really interesting stuff happening. You started to get, avatars on screen that were more representative of people. It was easier to understand, what they were trying to make you go through. Especially on the PlayStation 2, it started to feel like we have enough graphics to really render interesting people. They weren't real, but they were real enough, and so you could start to believe in them more.
I had grown the PC business pretty well, and was starting to look at the console business and thinking, wow, that would be a nice business for us to be in, but we really didn't know anything about it. And then one day, these guys walked into my office. They were from the DirectX team, and they said they had this idea to put DirectX into a box. There was going to be this DirectX box, and DirectX is the name of the Windows API for gaming. So this DirectX box was basically, it was going to act like a game console on the outside, but on the inside it was really going to be a PC running Windows and DirectX. That was the original plan. And so what I think we didn't really understand is, at the time, was that we were really bridging these two worlds. That Xbox was going to be this bridge between what was happening in PC gaming culture and what was happening in console gaming culture.
And then when we got to the PlayStation 3, we really said, okay, this thing's going to give us enough power to really go back and revisit that idea of telling an interesting character-driven narrative in a way that we might be able to do that no one's done before.
First time that I held a Wii controller, it was a piece of plywood with some electronics taped onto it, and they had a demo of a tennis game, and when I first picked it up and started playing it, I thought, this is going to be a hit. That was the first thing that popped into my head. It was just so much fun.
The Xbox 360 is a spectacular console. It's just fantastic. I absolutely love it. And I like the PS3 as well. Not really interested in, the holy wars about which one is better.
I guess they're fanboy arguments is how you could say it. Like, I like Nintendo, I like Sega, I like Sony. I think this is actually what happens, because when I was a kid, I would have had a Genesis and a Super Nintendo, I would have had a Nintendo and a Sega Master System if I could have afforded it. But, you're a child, you can't afford all that stuff. So then you start defending the one you have, and I think that's where that comes from, Xbox, no, PlayStation.
I still, to this day, stay up till 4 in the morning playing the latest Xbox 360 that came out yesterday, or whatever it may be. I'm, always constantly still immersing myself in it.
With the continuous waves of technical and artistic changes sweeping over the industry and games getting better and bigger, the video game industry began to anchor itself within the public consciousness. Many starting to argue that games are as much an art form as anything.
The trouble is with art is it's a subjective term. One person's art is another person's rubbish, and this is where you come back to the semantics of the word art, which is problematic. Whether that is a film, or whether that is a book, or whether that is a painting, or whether that is a computer game, it elicits a response. It makes you think about the world or look at the world in a slightly different way.
I've always believed that games are absolutely an art form. As Phil Fish said, it's the culmination of every form of art and expression that mankind has ever had goes into a game.
If you look at the staff that builds a video game, you have a music composer, you have a writer, you have an artist who does sketch work, you have a technical artist, you have level designers who create spaces, much like architects. It really is kind of the Avengers of talent when you really think about it.
Nowhere is it more obvious than in video games. You have these artists creating these beautiful three-dimensional worlds, and the technology allowing players to come into those worlds and have them be as real as possible is the ultimate example of art and science working together.
The best description of art I ever heard from a professor of mine when I was going for my MFA was that art is somebody who's put together something that deliberately provokes a response in an audience. The consumer actually is a participant in the art. It's almost like being part of a great art experiment, about a living art experiment.
Yeah, there's a lot of like basic logistics, like you push X and this happens, or you push up and that happens. But if that's all games were, we wouldn't be playing them anymore. You know, we would have lost interest a long, long time ago.
Surprisingly, modern game technology is still based on the same fundamental concept of early game tech, combining new layers of science and art to reach higher levels of innovation and expression. Modern game systems represent not only quantum leaps in hardware and graphics, but also the utilization of parallel data processing and memory within the cloud. What does all that mean? Simply put, it means from here on out, anyone will be able to play any game, anywhere, at any time, with amazing speed and quality.
The cloud is something that you hear a lot about these days, and there's really two very different concepts. The first one is the one that we all sort of understand as being the cloud. You know, I've got a picture, I want to upload it, I want to tweet. This is all being uploaded into the cloud and stored on hard drives. So think of the normal version of the cloud as a lot of storage space. There's another very, very big idea, which is why not use the computers in the cloud to give you computing power that's far beyond what you would generally want to purchase for yourselves. And what that means is that the software that you would love to experience will be running there, and then the video or the output from the game is delivered directly to wherever you are on whatever device you're on.
There's more processing power in the cloud behind Xbox One than the complete processing power that was on the planet in the year 1999. But we're now able to put scenes on screen that are almost beyond lifelike in some ways. But then you have the power of the cloud behind that box that allows us to draw upon thousands of servers to help make the box that's in your home actually significantly more powerful than it is by itself.
But there was a time when the future of this now mega industry was in serious jeopardy. After the explosive financial and cultural success of the first generation of video games, the industry began to think it was invincible.
You know, when all these companies saw that there was a market for video games, and they just, this flooded the market with so many games. There were a few companies out there that really wanted to show that they have a really awesome game, but then there were, for every one really awesome game, there were 100 really crappy games.
What happened was there was this manufacturing of great expectations that the next Christmas would be better than the previous one, and people just sort of moved on. People got tired of being sold the same thing again and again with pretty poor entertainment experience.
People started to produce games at a kind of very accelerated rate, and the quality of the gameplay went down substantially, to the point of where some of the games were so bad that they ended up having to throw a lot of them in landfills.
With scores of new game developers springing up overnight and venture capitalists pouring money into what seemed to be a sure-thing product, the writing was on the wall. The market was becoming saturated, and in 1983, the final nail was driven home. Atari made a deal with Universal Studios to create a video game adaptation of the popular movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Only from Atari. Made especially for systems from Atari. The video game that lets you help E.T. get home. Just in time for Christmas. Happy holidays.
With only 5 weeks to make the game, Atari scrambled to put out a subpar product. Overconfident and high on their previous success, in the fall of 1982, Atari shipped millions of E.T. cartridges despite its poor quality. The backlash was legendary. It caused a ripple effect throughout the entire games industry, and by the summer of 1983, consumer confidence in video games had reached an all-time low, and Atari, along with many other rising game companies, went down like the Titanic.
And so there came a lot of conflict, and the whole management style blew up, and Warner basically took over. They put their man in, Ray Kassar, who was from the East Coast, no experience in entertainment, in games, technology, or Silicon Valley. And he just didn't really understand or play games. So when you're that way, it's really hard as a president to really assess the quality of what's going on. It was that kind of attitude, you know, and creating terrible product that was driven by advertising and marketing and not by any content. And guess what? It didn't sell.
The one story about E.T.'s cartridges being buried in the desert is actually a true one. The fact that Atari rushed this game just to have it out with the movie, to use the license of E.T., because E.T. was huge in the 80s.
Both the E.T. and the Pac-Man games, those were two of the games that didn't do well. And they were trying to cram something into the Atari 2600 that it did not want to do.
The big crash happened in '83, and toy stores were unloading consoles for next to nothing.
Everybody just thought they could schlock any sort of games onto the system, and it was the first lesson that the industry learned in the fact that the consumers are smart, especially gamers, and you can't just put shovelware out there and fool them. They will not buy it.
But after the crash, they realized that, you know, for a lot of people it had been a fad, but for a core group of people, they still wanted to play games.
For a couple of years after the crash, many people thought that American video games would be relegated to the popular fads section of 21st century encyclopedias and forgotten. Enter Nintendo, a Japanese toy company who understood that the popularity of classic games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Pitfall proved that people like to play as a character, not just a spaceship or nameless block of pixels. Even with the crudity of the early 8-bit graphics, the concept of immersion and being a character was still very appealing to the public. And little did the world know, their favorite video game character was just around the corner.
This is Nintendo, a flashy little computer that lets you play video games on your TV set.
This is called Game Boy, and industry analysts say that there may be a run on this as the holiday demand exceeds the supply.
This is Super Mario 3. It's been a long-awaited game. Super Mario, of course, was very, very popular. Super Mario 2 was extremely popular. Now Super Mario 3 is coming out.
It's been the best-selling toy in this country for 3 years running. 20 million of these things now inhabit American living rooms. Inhabit is a very good word.
Because of the crash, no retailer wanted to touch a quote-unquote video game system. And so a lot of what we did was try to come up with something that was uniquely different. It wasn't just a game system, it had other features to it. And eventually we came up with Rob, the robotic operating buddy, and the Zapper gun and 2 cartridges. and we sold it as an entertainment system. Even with that, it was a hard sell to get the retailers to take it, but it was fairly successful. And during that first initial phase, Super Mario came out, and that sold like hotcakes. That was an extremely successful title.
Nintendo Entertainment System was, I think, a big landmark system, because before that, there was a big question mark about whether or not video games were going to be able to stay popular. There's the big video game crash, and then Nintendo showed us how we can bring them back and make them really popular again.
I remember seeing Super Mario Brothers for the first time and just being completely blown away. It was like, wow, there's an arcade in my house. This is the coolest thing ever.
And Mario Brothers was great, and Zelda was great, and so I put a lot of hours as a player into those early Nintendo games. I loved those early Nintendo games.
I saw the Nintendo Entertainment System and said, wow, this is new, unique, different, bringing new experiences to the consumer. I saw the original Mario Brothers and said, wow, this is new, this is different. The same for the original Legend of Zelda.
So after the video game crash, I kind of fell out of love with games for a while and just ignored them. And then one day, a neighbor kid down the street, I go over to his house, and he has this gray box with this Rob the Robot, and he has the Zapper gun, and we're playing this Duck Hunt game, and then he fires up the Super Mario game, and I was like, okay, this is some next level stuff. And I remember the first time that I jumped, and I hit a block that was there that I didn't know was there, one of the secret blocks with an extra life in it. My mind just exploded, because here are secrets in games now.
With the rebirth of the U.S. games industry, a new breed of gamers was rising. The appetite for simple maze-based games was waning. Gamers were ready for more. Becoming a character, living out a virtual story, and being absorbed in something otherworldly was not just technically possible now, but the expectations for deeper, more immersive experiences was growing.
As the game business evolved, people were making larger and more complicated games requiring 30-page manuals and 80 hours of gameplay to get into.
You never really cared about the characters in Gauntlet, it was just that Gauntlet was an addictive game. But now we not only spend more money on games, but we see them as entertainment mediums where we want to be invested in the story, we want to be invested in the world.
The huge difference is that the older games, I think, were a lot tougher. Like, if you did not get your jump exactly right to land on a platform, you were not getting through that level. Timing was everything. Now you have a lot more freedom. You can kill a boss many different ways.
It used to be before that the whole point of a game was literally shooting pixelated aliens that were falling out of the sky, but we didn't know why those aliens were falling out of the sky. We didn't care why those aliens were falling out of the sky. We just wanted to shoot them. But nowadays, not only do we know why those aliens are falling out of the sky, we know the names of their moms, and we know their future children's names, and we know we have to destroy all of them.
I feel like games, as they've developed throughout time, have kept a lot of the same traits. They've just sort of manipulated how they act in the game world because people have different desires for games. They want to be more involved. They don't want to just sit down and, sit at a bar for a little while and play Pong. They want to actually be invested in that game world a little more.
In the beginning, it was simply the industry understanding what are these mechanics? How do players interact with an interactive medium? As we started to understand those rules a little bit better, other aspects of crafting something really, really high-end or beautiful get worked in. And so high-end graphics start to become more relevant because we're, learning how visuals interact with the storytelling and interact with the gameplay.
In those days, the game designer's main job was to create the rules of a game. That is all. It was very much like chess or cards. In the 90s, with PlayStation and more powerful technology arriving, we had the gift of expression. Games became 3D. Characters could talk. Music could be created. Characters could emote through detailed facial expressions.
In the late 80s and early 90s, the industry was reinvigorated with new technology, new customers, and new talent. A renaissance in game design was arriving, which not only gave birth to some of the greatest video games of all time, but eventually a new industry that would generate billions of dollars and a new generation of game designers. the fall of 1972, a small group of computer science students at Stanford University's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory got the idea to convene the very first Intergalactic Space War Olympics with the use of the computer lab's very own PDP-10. Contestants fought it out on the machine's, at the time, impressive 10-inch raster display. 2 events were held, a 5-man free-for-all and a team competition. In Space War, 5 distinctly rendered vessels nicknamed Pointy Fins, Roundback, Birdie, Funny Fins, and Flatback battled to the death in the display's circular arena, dominated by a star whose gravitational pull drew them to the center. This was the very first video game tournament and the beginning of a community that would soon become a culture.
In my dorm room, we would throw cables over the balcony down to other people's computers and start these kind of homebrew LAN competitions where we were playing all kinds of games, from shooters to RTSs to anything that we could just play together.
Doom was like a bomb dropped on my 20s. I lived in a house with a bunch of other geeks, guys that I used to play Dungeons & Dragons with, and we first got Doom and built like a LAN in our house, and we had kind of network cable going from each room. And oh my god, that was all we did for like the next year, I could swear, just play Doom and Doom 2, 4 players. And just something about like blowing your friend in half and then hearing him in the next room like curse at you, like nothing is more satisfying.
Growing up in America, the one place you go is the mall. I was like that as a child, and I remember there was an arcade at the mall near our house called the Dream Machine. And it was this Stygian cave of noise and all these portals to all these other worlds you could go in and out. You know, Mr. Do, Dragon's Lair, Joust, Centipede, Frogger, all of them. And every time a new game would show up, I would be around it and on it, and there would be crowds around it. And eventually to the point where, you know, fighting games became a thing later on, and you would literally go up and put your quarter next in line and try and take down that one kid who's kicking everybody's butt as Chun-Li.
There was a time period where kids in arcade games who could rule, like at Chuck E. Cheese or at the mall arcade, or at the, you know, in my case a lot of time the bowling center, people would crowd around you if you were owning a game.
A global society was born. A society that now not only plays and connects online, but has produced lifelong friendships, thriving communities, even marriages. And this community doesn't just exist for entertainment's sake. Gamers are not only one of the most connected and vocal groups, they're some of the most loyal. Friendships forged within a game experience somehow yield a bond that isn't easily broken.
One of the things that is really exciting about games in general is that they've evolved far beyond the local community aspect of being able to, you know, just play the game or enjoy your game with some of your local friends, whatnot, into truly global experiences that where you can share your passion with people all around the world.
I love the connectivity. I have lifelong friends that I've met online, and we started out just playing together and then ended up, you know, meeting up for competitions or just meeting to go hang out and kind of actually meet each other in person. And it sounds silly, but a lot of those friendships are really solidified around that joint experience that you have while you're playing a game. And I think that that's that's something special, right? It's something magical.
That's something I saw working, you know, kind of the internet industry all through the 90s and the early aughts, was people who would meet other people online and become really enamored of them, and sometimes like move to another city to try living with this person, or, you know, people would get married or meet that way. And that's a whole new kind of human relationship that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. It's like a new thing. People can meet and fall in love and not have ever met in the real world.
I can't tell you how many stories we've gotten of people being, you know, hookups because of it, you know, and people eventually getting married because of the game. People that have gone through, you know, some sort of horrible medical condition that they've had to deal with, and the game's kind of let them work through that.
I see that, you know, deaths of key characters really affected people and made them cry in the game, or they got tattoos of the, you know, logo of the game on their bodies, or a man and his wife met on Xbox Live playing the game, and now they play co-op every night.
There are kids out there who exist now because their parents met in World of Warcraft, you know, like video games have changed the, you know, the course of human evolution to some degree, and created whole new mating rituals and ways of social interaction that didn't exist, and that's as a result of the internet and video games. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of that evolve. Video games are going to get more and more real and connect more and more people around the world.
I used to play EverQuest quite a lot, as many EverQuest players did. A guy that I met in South Korea, PvPing, we became friends. I ended up going to his wedding 10 years later. We're family friends now. And it's phenomenal because we have this shared passion for games. We had a lot of similar values and ideas, and we had a lot of great shared experiences online where we really formed a deep bond and true friendship, and has, you know, blossomed into a great, long-lasting friendship in the real world.
I saw someone recently speaking about a boy whose parents were killed in a car accident, so he was left alone in the world, and without video games to sort of fall back into, he'd be sitting in his room depressed out of his mind, and his video game world and all his friends in his video game world really supported him through that really painful time. And the guy who was observing this was basically saying, you know, you guys don't really understand it, because I know you hear this all the time, that violent video games are the problem in the world, etc., etc. But the things, the games are so meaningful to people, and they're such, the friends that they build around it, and the sort of the creativity and the immersion and everything else that comes with it is actually very valuable, and it's something you learn a lot from.
I walked into the stairwell here, and I was just shooting. I can't even really describe it, but I basically fell down the stairs because I had a stroke, as they later revealed to me. I ended up in the hospital for about 9-10 days, and you're really scared, and you really don't know where to I mean, then you're like sad, and you have all this anger, and you don't know where to aim it. And my friends started bringing stuff up to me, and at first it was food, and then they started bringing ways to play games up. I got a little Nintendo DS, and I was playing Zelda on that, and I had a laptop, and I was playing, I mean, I had Steam on there, and I had just TF2 and Left 4 Dead and Borderlands, and and that really was the turning point at the hospital, where I wasn't as scared, I guess, anymore. I wasn't as mad. I had something to do. Because part of the stroke that was awful was I went blind out of my right eye, and it's sort of crazy how not just the games in the hospital that really got me through it. It's been everyone around me in this industry, like in all different companies in all different states. So yeah, in a very literal way, I think video games really did kind of save my life.
The world is now engulfed in an artistic, social, and technological revolution like never before. Interactive entertainment is the ultimate expression and delivery format, but who will determine what stories are told and how we will experience them in the future? The answer is simple. Children have a limitless capacity for wonder, imagination, and creativity. And they aren't afraid to fail.
When I learned history in school, it was the most boring. It was old books with black and white images in them. And I saw a girl in a video recently from Carnegie Mellon that was talking about trebuchets, which is this old medieval siege weapon. But she had actually experienced using one because, of course, she'd done it in a virtual world. And to have, I think she was 6, to have a 6-year-old girl telling you her opinion of medieval siege weapons versus my version of it, which was so incredibly boring, is a fundamental change to education through entertainment that can make history and things like that much more engrossing.
My kid, he is 12 and he is faster at things that I'm not as fast at. He is better at things, and it's because while his mind was developing, he had access to interactive media that was much more advanced than the interactive media that I had, and the interactive media that I had was the first time. My parents didn't have any interactive media when their brains were developing.
Video games, I think, they provide a space for learning how to fail safely and successfully. I think as a culture, we have a real obsession with always getting things right. We're afraid of failing. But video games provide us this very safe space to learn how to problem solve, to think through an issue that we can't quite get right, to help us realize that it's okay to fall on our face occasionally if we learn from that and we eventually can succeed.
Because it's simulation, we can do things and experience things and practice things and test things that either aren't feasible or aren't safe in real life, in the real world.
Despite the mainstream acceptance of video games in the 80s and early 90s, by the late 90s, the term gamer still seemed to be a close cousin to geek or nerd. If you were a serious, dedicated gamer, you were seen as part of a strange subculture. But the winds of change were blowing, and this perception would soon shift. Being a gamer would soon be in vogue.
I can feel it burn. We're taking over. We're taking over. Now I try to lead them. Will they ever learn? We're taking over. We're taking over. Every time I'm breathing, I can feel it burn. We're taking over. We're taking over. Now I try to lead them. Will they ever learn? We're taking over. We're taking over. Hands up in the sky, let me hear you say. Every time I'm breathing, I can feel it burn. We're taking over. We're taking over.
It's a borderline religious experience to stand in the middle of a esports stadium packed full of tens of thousands of players cheering for, their favorite teams. It's just awesome to see because it's easy to doubt that type of passion would actually manifest in a physical environment, that people would pay hundreds of dollars or travel thousands of miles to come to these events to watch people play video games, and they do, and they love it.
I've always been kind of frustrated by the perception of video game nerdiness and things like that. From my career making games that feel like summer blockbusters and don't feel like, D&D basement games, to having the courage to put myself out there on camera and put on a clean shirt and kind of change that perception as well, to just evangelizing games overall and to also evangelize the career. And so over the course of my 20-plus year career in this business, I've always hoped that there's some kids out there who see a football player or astronaut, and they're like, yeah, that's awesome, but maybe video games, maybe that's where I want to be.
And there are a lot of people who message me or send me emails, and they are just miserable because they're super lonely. They haven't found their friend group, And I think that's sort of like my mission, is to connect people and make people happy and give people friends, because I never had that growing up. I never had my nerd group.
I think that's how communities have really started up, is just being able to find people with similar interests. When you're a kid, it's really only like if your next door neighbor played. But now we're all adults and have the ability to reach out and connect with someone else.
It's clearly a culture where everybody's having fun. Everybody's got a smile on their face. They're living their life in a very, very, powerful way.
The old way of computers are for geeks and stuff, and video games are for geeks, has died, is dead. No one doesn't have Facebook. Angry Birds, people almost don't even think of that as a video game. People don't think of, there's become this blur of like what is a video game and what isn't. Is Facebook a video game? I kind of think it is. I mean, it's interactive like a video game and you can do stuff on it.
The world's really different now. And I think it's because those of us that grew up being ostracized and looked down upon and treated like we were radioactive by mainstream culture created our own culture, and we took the things that we loved. We took the video games and we took the technology and we took the engineering and we built our own world out of those things. And that world is so awesome that the mainstream culture that made fun of us when we were kids for loving this culture that's so awesome could not deny it and could not help but be seduced by it.
We're celebrating Video Game Week starting today.
From Studio 6B in Rockefeller Center, the National Broadcasting Company presents Late Night with Jimmy Fallon.
Look at it, looks slick, come on.
Well, it's the most powerful video game console ever made. We were targeting about 10 times the performance of any previous
10 times?
system. Yeah, 10
Really?
times. Yeah.
I didn't think you can get better than PS3, but you can 10 times, I guess.
We're gonna play this together. So this is Super Mario
so excited about
3D
this.
World.
Yeah. That's my man. I love Mario. I broke a sweat on that video game. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a professional actor reading the line, "It's a me, Mario," in a very dramatic way.
It's a me, Mario.
Hey, Conan O'Brien here. Once again, I know absolutely nothing about video games, which is why I've decided to review them.
Take a girl for a ride.
Oh my God. I've never licked a remote before.
I look like John Tesh after he's been dead a year. What did you just say?
I hate tombs.
Yeah, guess what? Then don't be a Tomb Raider! Oh, don't try. I meant to compliment her and I almost kicked her.
In the late 90s, with realism in games reaching new levels and more visceral, action-packed fare appearing on game shelves, a new conversation started. Violence.
The world of home video games isn't holding back the violence. Mortal Kombat, 2 of the bloodiest games to date, were released yesterday.
This game encourages players to shoot this gun, which is called a justifier.
Kids who play video games too often are more likely to be violent. That's the finding of a new study out of Japan's Tohoku University.
There was no rating on this game at all when the game was introduced.
Have a great deal of information that is racist, sexist, and promotes models of violence.
Recommendations on guns after that series of meetings, and as you mentioned, the latest with video game makers who said, don't blame us.
There's always a lot of media talking about violence in video games. And certainly there are violent video games, but that's not how you describe the medium of gaming.
If I were to go to the cinema and I were to just watch Saw movies and I came away and you asked me what I felt about the cinema, I would say it was the most disgusting, violent, gratuitous thing. And that's what the media has done, is it's focused on a few titles, and that has ended up in consumers' minds defining what this industry is.
It's weird how when you watch the people, you know, they go to Congress and they're angry, you know, our kids are being corrupted. I'm like, yeah, exactly, your kids. You should be not corrupting them. I leave them alone 10 hours a day. It's like finding your dad's Playboys under the bed and then blaming Playboy.
You know, we're just like any other industry that we have these rating systems in place, and there's going to be something for everybody.
We put measures in place. ESRB are our guidelines. We make sure that we build our game to the rating. It gets checked on a regular basis.
The interesting thing, I think, with games is that we actually have an even better rating system than movies, but there's still kind of this general misunderstanding with the elder generation that somehow all games are like Grand Theft Auto.
People like to make just kind of a causal link and say video games cause violence. And it's like, well, let's see. So there's more crime in the summer, and more ice cream is sold in the summer. Therefore, ice cream causes crime. That's not how legitimate scientific research works.
Violence, unfortunately, is a part of human nature. And last time I checked, Cain didn't bludgeon Abel with a Game Boy. Genghis Khan didn't have an Xbox Live account. And, you know, Hitler didn't play Crash Bandicoot.
We have unfortunately had a lot of gun crime in the United States recently, and I remember someone tweeted after one of the most recent incidences when people started accusing video games of being an influence for this. They were like, wow, I wonder how all those other countries with the same exact video games as us don't have as much gun crime.
You know, it'd be like saying, we don't want anyone to go watch movies because all movies are violent. But people don't say that because, you know, everyone really understands movies as a medium.
I don't believe that video games are murder simulators. If anything, what the statistics prove is that it's exactly the opposite.
We've survived a lot of things as gamers for a really long time. We've survived Congress, we've survived busybody parents, we've survived religious-based hysteria.
You realize that it's about imagination and invention and a connection to a world, and it doesn't have these big trappings that people apply to them. So I think it's a problem that's just going to naturally evolve away, and we just have to defend the industry until that evolution happens.
The campfire. We've all been there. Whether an actual campfire or just listening to someone tell a great story. As humans, we've always had the ability and desire to suspend our disbelief. If only for a few minutes a day, we want to escape from the treadmill of life and give it up, to be immersed in something outside ourselves.
We have this opportunity to be storytellers, to be able to give the consumer the opportunity to lose themselves in a world for as long or as little as they want. We have the realities of life every day, whether it's the economy or whether it's getting by or whether it's a job and earning money, but we have a medium that we can lose ourselves in.
Day-to-day life isn't always that exciting, and if at the end of the day you can turn on a tablet, a PC, a console, and just kind of escape into another world, I think it's a wonderful thing that essentially allows you to kind of live the dream.
The storytelling in games is just as good as movies. It's just as good as reading a book.
With the resurrection and renaissance of the industry coming into the 90s and early 2000s, games began another evolutionary step forward. Story. This fundamentally changed the audience's expectations of what a good game really was and raised the bar for game designers everywhere.
Storytelling in games is a tricky beast to tame. As game makers, we have to set up rules. We have to set up universes that make sense and have their own sense of logic. And once we've established what that logic is, then we let the player's mind and imagination solve problems and work their way through those worlds.
I think one of the things we've really learned over the last maybe decade is ways to tell stories without a cutscene, without stopping the interactivity, to have the story be something that emerges from the play itself.
Video games are a lean forward experience, whereas film and television are a lean back experience. You're driving every moment of the game. A friend of mine a while back actually compared games to novels, and the fact that if you stop reading, the novel doesn't keep going, and video games are very much the same.
Telling a story in video games can be a lot more difficult, because then you have to anticipate the actions of the player. Whereas in a movie, you decide what both characters say, and then you write it down, and that's what they say.
Storytelling in games is an interesting problem right now because we don't fully understand it. The movie industry has been around for 100 years or whatever, and they have a really good idea of what it means to tell story in that kind of visual medium. And the game industry doesn't have all those rules yet.
Either reading a book or watching a movie, it's completely passive. You're letting the storyteller give you their vision of their world or whatever story they want to tell you, and you're listening to it. It's unfolding for you. You're not affecting that. With a game, the journey is the reward more than, say, the ending or the payoff.
This is our routine. Day and night, all we do is survive. It never lets up.
The idea of spontaneity within storytelling is something that's unique to video games. You can't just change how a song sounds midway through it. You can't just change the end of a book while you're reading it. But in certain games, your decisions have a direct outcome on the ultimate fate of characters. And that's unique and sweet, and I think that's what people respond to.
Can you imagine if you were redoing Star Wars and you get to Empire Strikes Back and Vader says, "Join me," and you, as Luke Skywalker, go, "Okay." And then the rest of the movie and all of Jedi are completely different because you made that choice. And that is where I think video games fundamentally and vastly differ from every other kind of nerd media that I love.
Who lives? Who dies?
I get it. We're meant to choose.
Hands up!
Time.
Guns down. You don't have to get involved.
We must choose.
If you insist,
I do not see how I could save the lives of other people.
I also lost someone I loved.
Whether the classic Arthurian legends or more modern translations, one thing humanity has never had a problem with is the willing suspension of our disbelief. The earliest storytellers saw the primal power in writing, reading, and telling stories, true or fictional.
I think that once you show a player what a world looks like and how a world functions, they get into the world and then that is their reality. And so I think as modern game makers, we have to keep remembering that the suspension of disbelief comes from the creation of a universe and the creation of a world and an immersive world that has rules that are predictable and that are logical, and not from the visual eye candy that we get, you know, with all this horsepower.
And now that we have these consoles that deliver mind-blowing graphics and beautiful explosions and immersive worlds, there's something more to it. We've taken our inspirations from outside of games with emotion and character development and storytelling in a way that we've tried to break new ground, that you have an association and an attachment with a character in a game that makes you want to feel for that story. Makes you want to feel like you're there making the decisions all along the way.
Good storytelling is not just entertainment. Good stories can help us grow. They can teach us about the past and challenge us to aspire to greater and higher things. The story experience in a video game is no different. The campfire is just a bit brighter and more colorful.
So many things have to perfectly sync up for it to work. You have art, you have writing, you have music, you have backgrounds, you have timing, you have the voice actors, you have acting. And then video games, you have everything on top of that. It has to be an engaging user experience as well. So I think a good video game, I think, is probably the hardest thing to make.
If you want emotion, you need the human face. And in the world of film, that is the cheapest thing that you can get. You point a camera at somebody and you have it instantly. But in the world of games, you have a multi-million investment in technology before you see anything that looks like a human face.
I think the most exciting part about this industry is that we're constantly inventing and being fearless about that challenge of invention. And invention's difficult because if you already knew what it was going to be, you wouldn't be inventing it. It would already exist, right? So whenever we invent, whether it's a design idea or a stylistic thing or, you know, something related to the story, we kind of depend upon this trust that there will be inspiration, that there will be revelation.
Then you got to get in and start prototyping stuff. So you build a bunch of prototypes and you start trying to understand, hey, are the ideas we had really fun once you put them into an interactive environment?
You know, I think at the alpha stage, hopefully we'll see the fun. It's pins and needles time because it's that awkward teenage years that, you know, you've got to, could be an awesome experience. It could really come together nicely. Everyone's really enthusiastic because there's something there to play from beginning to end. But, you know, there are some weird elements to it, and, you know, you've just had a bunch of people come through and point out all your, you know, awkwardness, your buck teeth and your, you know, crazy looking eyebrow and all that stuff, and you're sort of hoping that, okay, I see that, I understand it, now I need to kind of go back and fix those things a little bit, make myself a little prettier, get back out on the street and show myself off again.
You start layering on all the really rich assets, things like a great story, the high fidelity art, the fully detailed characters. And once you start marrying this super high production quality with those original bare bones prototypes of your design ideas, you can start really bringing the product together.
And then the work to go from alpha to beta is, generally speaking, a laundry list of things that we have to check off and make sure are working properly. We don't touch those as much at alpha, but they certainly are on our minds at that point as we start to kind of polish up the game, make those adjustments to the gameplay, really try to hone down on what's working well and maybe give it some more resources and time to develop and sort of put aside those things that aren't working as well.
One of the big revolutions we had in the 1990s was we started bringing in people to play our games and watch them play. That's it. But it transformed the way that we make games. I mean, up until that point, we'd pretty much been making the games for ourselves. And so if we thought it was fun, we were done.
You sort of had to make a game and then do, you know, kind of one of these. Did it feel right? You know, you'd have your QA department, but, you know, they were paid employees, so, you know, you never know if you're getting the best feedback. But now we have this beta testing and ability to talk with the fans. And if you're utilizing that correctly, it's really powerful.
So you hand this, what you think is the gold master, off to the first party, in the console world anyway. On the PC side, it's definitely still more of a Wild West. But there's a lot of backlash, certainly if you can't deliver quality, or you have lots of bugs in a PC product. So you hand it off to Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, and you wait. And you wait, and you wait. And usually it's, you know, a 10-day waiting game. And, you know, it's always the most nerve-wracking time is that, okay, is this going to make it through? And so, you know, we get that call maybe, or email, you know, maybe 10 days later or so. And, you know, it's, hey, looks good, celebration ensues. Or you've got these, you know, critical issues and these minor issues, and you need to fix, you know, the critical issues and as many minor issues as you can and resubmit. And yeah, and then it hits the streets. People either love it or hate it. Most of the time, both. You get both ends, no matter how good your game is. And you sort of have to, you roll with the punches. You let people say their piece.
I look out today, things have changed beyond belief. Titles we saw 1,000 man-years of programming, artwork, and design work went into them. It's astonishing.
It's making a movie times 1,000. It is daunting. I don't know why I do it.
The evolution of great storytelling in video games couldn't have come at a better time. It seems as if the technology rose to the occasion at precisely the right moment. From the turn of the century to now, games have never looked better, felt better, or played better. Enter the next generation.
RPMs are in the red, driving closer to the edge, up on Flagstaff Road. I still remember what you said. Are you living, are you dead? You better let me know. World is Vegas like a cinema, standing naked on the stage and I'm unashamed. It's so easy to be cynical. Let's turn around and start again. Let's get out tonight. You got the fire, I got the fire. In my young blood. Let's fight up the start. You got the fuel, I got the spark. In my young blood. In my young blood.
It's funny because every few years the industry really kind of reinvents itself. Whether that's we figure out a new way to give that experience to players, or there's a new piece of hardware out there, or some new technology, some new interface. There's always that new challenge.
Right now is a really difficult time for the industry. We are in transition of consoles, and we are seeing a lot of the economic scorecards have come in about what games do and do not make money and which are the best to be doing.
Honestly, it's so hard to predict. I mean, no one would predict that the platforms that are most popular right now, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, no one would have predicted that that's what would be the norm now.
Every new console generation, we get more and more horsepower. And every console generation, there are people who say, is this enough?
Okay, oh, this is really awesome. And then 5 minutes later, it wasn't that awesome. I need a new awesome thing, you know, because we're just so spoiled with it.
The medium has grown up a lot from the early days. I think part of it is that we finally have the technology to render characters in a believable way.
As we look as a studio how we're going to evolve our new IP and moving into this next phase, this next generation of consoles, we're having to think outside the box. We're having to look at how we set the foundation of a structure for the next 10 years.
I think at this point we're in a pretty interesting crossroads in the history of games. Publishers, especially in companies, are fairly risk-averse right now because everybody foresees a big change happening and nobody knows what it is.
I often compare indie developers and big, huge studios to a couple of guys in a Zodiac raft and an entirely fully loaded battleship. Each one has its own strengths, and I think where the indie guys literally and figuratively run circles around the big publishers is that they're a lot more mobile. They don't have to make as many complicated boardroom-based decisions. They can focus on the kind of game that they want to make, and because of things like Steam, they can take their game, make it awesome, and then get it directly to players who then spread the existence of their game because they love it so much that they're telling other people about it, they're sharing it on forums, they're giving it to their friend lists, and they don't really need to make that investment of ridiculous amounts of money on advertising and marketing.
The AAA games have beautiful graphics, big budgets, incredible art teams, but that's not always necessarily what makes a great game.
Really, whenever a platform has opened itself up to allow hobbyists to be able to create products, you get incredible amounts of innovation.
The interesting thing about that is when you get to a team of like 200 people, the ability to innovate is pretty much zero. You have to basically go with what was designed originally, and that's what the game becomes. The smaller the team, the more you can discover the really important flashes of lightning and flashes of insight that happen after large parts of the game are done. and then you're like, oh, you know, what would be really cool is in this section and that section if we could do this. You know, and if you have a 200-person team, you can't pivot on a dime like that. You have to be like, well, that would be nice, but we don't have time, and we have to get done.
But I do think that there's like a revolution afoot in gaming where people are interested in finding those games that have more character and soul than what they've experienced before.
A large game developer might not be able to take big risks on a virtual reality title that only works in VR and really utilizes it. But in indie, they're driven by passion, by wanting to make the best game possible. They're usually not sitting there saying, how can I make something that really gives me a nice return on investment? And I think that that's going to become more and more important in the game space in the coming years.
Where do we go from here? Many think that when it comes to the next generation of the Campfire, the traditional game controller tied to a screen gameplay experience may have its limitations.
One of the things I'm most excited about is virtual reality. I think a lot of us can remember back in the early 90s when movies like The Lawnmower Man came out and VR was going to be the next big thing. And it never really was, because the headsets were big and clunky, the graphics were crappy. Well, thanks to recent advances in smartphone technology and screens and tracking devices, VR is set for a big comeback.
I didn't actually start out to create a virtual reality headset. I set out to buy a really nice one. So I tried buying all manner of different head mounts, and none of them was really what I wanted for playing video games immersively. And so I said, oh shoot, well, it looks like I'm going to have to actually try to make my own. And I actually found that it was something that there was a lot of technology that advanced over the last few years, and it was actually something that was finally possible to do.
How do you walk around in that virtual world? How do you physically move in a natural way beyond just sitting down and using keyboard and mouse? That's why we developed the Omni. It's an interface that allows you to walk and move freely and naturally in your favorite game.
But when you break it all down, I hope we never get rid of the kind of gaming where I just get to sit on a couch and push some buttons for a while.
Could those early pioneers, whose ideas eventually gave birth to an industry, have guessed what it one day would become? Would it be foreign to them? Or did they have a feeling from the beginning that the ideas and creativity of each generation of new designers and artists would forever reinvent the medium?
You know, back when we were working on games on the Atari 800, I think people would have laughed if you said, this is going to be a meaningful art form and it's going to be in the Smithsonian one day.
I never thought it would amount to anything. Nolan was running around saying, oh, it's going to be a big industry and we're going to sell millions of games and it's going to take over. And I fully expected that Atari was going to fail until the day Nolan and Joe came back from the visiting Warner. He informs us they want to pay this money for us, you know, like $20 million or $30 million. It was like, what?
The amazing thing for us, you know, back in the early days is we envisioned this. We really did look forward to a day where video games would be interactive movies, would look like interactive movies. And, I mean, we are there.
The spirit of curiosity and invention that was there at the industry's creation is still its driving force. Today's game designers continue to give audiences new and fresh interpretations of classic stories. What began as a single pixel has now redefined what storytelling is for the 21st century and beyond.
The future of games inherently gets tied up into the future of technology in a lot of ways, and it's really hard to know beyond a couple years where technology is going to go.
we have a faster rate of invention than probably any medium before it.
I think video games in the next 30 to 40 years are going to be unimaginable, where you can't tell fantasy from reality and you can live the dream that you've always wanted to live.
We have a lot of really intelligent people becoming intelligent through the use of this stuff.
Video games, I feel like, are inching towards the holodeck, because that's the end goal, is to have to be as much like real life as possible.
Couldn't the whole world just be digitized and that make it an easier, safer, and better place? I could see us getting there, and getting there quick. What is the ineffable sort of characteristics that make real life important? I think this is what video games are going to start challenging in the next 20 years.
The size and scope of the modern video game industry might well be far beyond the greatest expectations of the men who began it. But games will continue to be created as they always have, by drawing on history and culture, imagination and technology, to deliver stories and experiences that delight and challenge generations to come, whatever form the games may take.
I think that's why a lot of nerds play video games, because we have it pretty tough. We don't quite fit in, but in a game, we always fit in. Always.
Even though I make them every day, even though I play broken games for years before they're perfect and we put them on a shelf, and you know there's so many issues that go along with that, I still have the capability of being transported back to that little kid wrapped in a blanket, staying up way too late, sitting in front of a tiny television, obsessed. And I really, really want to give that to another 8-year-old kid and have him feel the same thing 30 years from now as well.
It's the same reason that kids play Cowboys and Indians when they're young, or you saw Star Wars. You want it to be that. It's fantasy fulfillment, and being able to do fantasy fulfillment on the level of fully interactive worlds that you can explore and get lost in.
It was how to get my game to delight as many people as possible. And it's coming back to this fundamental thing that we do in the games industry, is delight people, is entertain people.
You know, I used to say to people, you know, someday everybody will be a gamer. And, you know, that was like an aspirational thing. Now I can't even use that line anymore, because because it's like, duh, well, everybody is.
There's something which we never expected, which was an assumption you'd have in the film industry to some degree, that you make a film and people could archive the film and see it decades or hundreds of years later. In the game industry, I never thought that would be the case. And seeing people who are still loving these old games means that they'll probably be surviving for decades to come in some form or another.
There are a lot of people that have dreams. I like to say everyone who has ever had a shower has had a good idea. It's the people who dry off and do something about them that makes the difference. I think the world is way too interesting to dwell on your past. And I'm proud of my participation in this industry. But I think that what is really more remarkable is how we can take all the things we've learned and push it yet one step further.
I Gotta tell you, gotta tell you, gotta tell you,
I can still remember some of the music.
I think my favorite memory from playing video games was when I first played Bonk's Adventures.
The one with the TIE Fighter and the one with the motorcycle things.
Burger Time. I loved Burger Time. Ooh, Crystal Castles. Ghosts and Goblins.
I would close my eyes and see falling Tetris blocks, and that's when I knew Tetris was going to be my favorite video game of all time. In the elevators. Beep, 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 beep.
It's something my family and I have always bonded over. It's the common topic around dinner tables, and it's molded and sculpted my life into what it is today.
My wife is kind of like my mom when it comes to video games now. She tries to regulate how much I play.
First game that I actually remember playing was Pitfall for the Atari 2600. It's from that point on that I had a special place in my heart as a gamer.
And also the Atari had so many problems, like if it got dusty, your games didn't work, so you'd have to blow on the games and bang the games.
It was really cool.
Being an engineer, I think this place needs more cross-bracing.
One of my favorite gaming memories ever is the first year that I signed up for Extra Life. And in the first year, I raised over $1,000 for the children's hospital of my choice. And it made me so proud to be a gamer.
Thank you.
Joining Clan Mac Addict and playing Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and met a lot of great guys during that, some I still consider friends, even though I've never met them in real life.
When they're totally flush, it's the only time to get it.
Whatever the industry take us next, I would definitely be there for the ride. Gamer forever.
People kill each other in a toy store in order to get that Nintendo 64 game. I'm one of those people.